The security guard's hand moved toward his radio as my sister-in-law's voice cut through the emergency room like a blade. Get her out of here before she makes things worse. 23 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, standing there in my faded jeans and oversized hoodie, looking nothing like someone who belonged in the sterile corridors of Riverside General Hospital. What they didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, those same people would be apologizing profusely, and my brother would be questioning everything he thought he knew about his own family. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. 6 in tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, dragging me from the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. The number on the screen made my stomach drop. It was my brother Marcus calling from Seattle. Riley, you need to get to Riverside General, now. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. It's Dad. 20 minutes later, I was speeding down Highway 405 in my beat-up Honda Civic, still wearing the paint-stained sweats I'd fallen asleep in. The 40-minute drive to Seattle felt like hours. My father had suffered a massive heart attack while visiting Marcus and his wife Bethany. At 71, Dad had always seemed invincible. The man who'd worked construction for 40 years, who'd never missed a day of work even when he broke his wrist falling off a ladder. The automatic doors of Riverside General whooshed open, and I was hit by that familiar smell of antiseptic and anxiety that all hospitals seem to share. The emergency department was buzzing with controlled chaos, nurses moving efficiently between rooms, the steady beep of monitors, families huddled together in uncomfortable plastic chairs. I spotted Marcus immediately. He was pacing near the reception desk, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. Bethany sat nearby, clutching her designer purse like a shield, her makeup still flawless despite the early hour. They'd always been the successful ones, Marcus with his tech startup, Bethany with her real estate empire. The golden couple who lived in their glass house in Bellevue, who posted their perfect life all over social media. How is he? I asked, rushing over. Marcus's relief was visible when he saw me. He's stable, but it was close. They're running more tests. He pulled me into a quick hug, and for a moment we were just two scared kids again, worried about our dad. Bethany looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. Riley, you look, she paused, searching for a diplomatic way to say like you rolled out of bed and drove through the night in a panic. Tired. I ignored her. Bethany had never liked me, not since the day Marcus brought her home 6 years ago. I was the family disappointment. The daughter who'd dropped out of her pre-med program, who lived in a tiny apartment in Portland, who worked odd jobs and seemed to drift through life without direction.
At least, that's what they thought. Can we see him?
I asked. Family only, and only 2 at a time, Marcus said. Bethany and I just came out. The nurse said we could go back in about an hour. We settled into the waiting area, and I tried to ignore the way Bethany kept glancing at my appearance. My hoodie had a small paint stain on the sleeve from a freelance graphic design job I'd finished the week before. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and I hadn't bothered with makeup. Next to Bethany's polished perfection, I probably looked like I'd been living under a bridge. You know, Bethany said after a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, maybe you should go home and shower, change clothes, come back when visiting hours start properly. I'm not leaving, I said flatly. Riley, be reasonable. You look exhausted, and frankly, you're not exactly presentable. What if the doctors need to discuss something serious? They need to see that Dad has a family who can handle important decisions. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Bethany, she's his daughter. Of course she is, honey. I'm just saying that first impressions matter, especially in a place like this. These are serious medical professionals. They're used to dealing with, well, people who understand these environments. Her implication was crystal clear. I wasn't dressed right. I didn't belong in their world of important decisions and medical consultations. I was the screw-up sister who should probably wait in the parking lot. I'm staying, I repeated, my voice harder this time. The next few hours passed slowly. Marcus dozed fitfully in his chair, while Bethany made phone calls to their friends, updating them on the situation in hushed, dramatic tones. I stared at the muted television playing some morning talk show, my mind racing with worry about Dad and frustration with the subtle way I was being made to feel unwelcome. Around 7 a.m., things got worse. Dr. Jennifer Hassan emerged from the cardiac unit, her scrubs looking fresh despite the early hour. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She approached our small group with the measured steps of someone carrying serious news. "Are you Mr. Thompson's family?" she asked. We all stood up. "Yes, I'm his son Marcus. This is my wife Bethany, and this is my sister Riley." Hassan nodded politely, but her eyes lingered on me for just a moment, taking in my casual clothes, my tired appearance. "I need to update you on your father's condition. He's had what we call a STEMI, an ST elevation myocardial infarction. It's a severe type of heart attack caused by a complete blockage of a coronary artery." Bethany immediately stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of me. "Doctor, we're very concerned about the level of care he's receiving. We want to make sure he has access to the best specialists, the most advanced treatments. Cost isn't an issue. Of course. Your father is receiving excellent care. We've already performed an emergency angioplasty to open the blocked artery, and he's responded well. However, given the extent of the damage, we're recommending he be evaluated for bypass surgery." "Bypass surgery?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "It's a serious procedure, but in cases like your father's, it can significantly improve both quality of life and longevity. I'd like to have our cardiac surgery team consult with you about the options." That's when Bethany made her move. "Doctor, I think it would be best if you could speak with Marcus and me about the details. We're the ones who'll be handling the medical decisions and insurance matters." She glanced at me with what she probably thought was a sympathetic smile. "Riley is very emotional about this whole situation, and we want to make sure we can have a clear, rational discussion about Dad's care." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I'm perfectly capable of understanding medical information." "Of course you are, sweetie," Bethany said in that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "But let's be honest, this is incredibly complex medical stuff. Marcus has his MBA, and I deal with complicated contracts all the time. We're probably better equipped to understand the technical aspects and insurance implications." Dr. Hassan looked uncomfortable, glancing between us. "Well, typically we prefer to include all immediate family members in these discussions, and we appreciate that," Bethany continued smoothly. "But we also want to be respectful of your time. Riley, why don't you go get some coffee, maybe call work and let them know you'll need some time off. Marcus and I can handle the medical consultation, and we'll fill you in on everything afterward." The dismissal was clear. I was being relegated to coffee runs while the adults handled the important stuff. Marcus looked torn, caught between his wife and his sister, but he didn't speak up. "I'd prefer to stay," I said, my voice steady, despite the anger building inside me. Bethany's mask of politeness slipped just slightly. "Riley, please, this is about what's best for Dad. We need to be practical here." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that when you're dealing with life and death medical decisions, you want people involved who understand these environments, who can ask the right questions, who won't get overwhelmed by the technical details." Dr. Hassan cleared her throat. "Perhaps we could all—" "Doctor," Bethany interrupted. "I'm sure you understand our position. This is a very expensive, very serious procedure. The people making these decisions need to be able to handle complex medical and financial information. We're talking about someone's life here." That's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't just about my appearance or my perceived ability to understand medical jargon. This was about power, control, and the narrative Bethany had constructed about our family hierarchy. In her world, I was the irresponsible sister who couldn't be trusted with important decisions. I was the one who should be grateful to be included at all. "Doctor," Hassan looked increasingly uncomfortable with the family dynamics playing out in front of her. "I think it would be best if I just spoke with all of you." "Actually," Bethany said, her voice taking on a sharper edge, "I think Riley might be more comfortable waiting outside while we handle this. These conversations can be very overwhelming for people who aren't used to medical settings." The nurse at the nearby station had stopped her paperwork and was now openly listening to our conversation. A few other families in the waiting area were glancing over. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and rage. "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly. "Riley, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Marcus finally spoke up, his voice tired. "Bethany's right. Maybe it would be better if you waited outside while we talk to the doctor. We can explain everything to you afterward. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. And there it was, my own brother, choosing his wife's version of reality over his sister's right to be involved in our father's care. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd let his wife orchestrate this entire humiliating scene because it was easier than standing up to her. Dr. Hassan was now visibly struggling with how to handle the situation. I really think, no, I said louder this time. I'm his daughter. I have every right to be involved in decisions about his care. Bethany's patience finally snapped completely. Riley, for God's sake, look at yourself. Look around this place. These are serious medical professionals dealing with life and death situations. They don't have time to hold your hand and explain everything in simple terms. This isn't some community clinic. This is a major medical center. Maybe you should recognize when you're out of your depth. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around us, the normal sounds of the hospital continued, monitors beeping, pages being called over the intercom, the quiet conversations of other families dealing with their own crises. But in our little corner of the waiting area, everything had gone silent. Dr. Hassan looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. The nurse at the station was now blatantly staring. A security guard who'd been walking by had slowed his pace, clearly picking up on the tension. Maybe, Bethany continued, her voice now carrying the tone of someone who'd decided to end this once and for all. You should go home, Riley. Come back during regular visiting hours when you've had time to compose yourself. Leave the medical decisions to people who actually understand these things. That's when something inside me broke. Not the kind of break that leads to tears or shouting, but the quiet kind that happens when you realize you're being underestimated, dismissed, done pretending that other people's assumptions about you are your problem to manage. I looked at Bethany with her perfect makeup and her designer handbag, standing there like she owned the place. I looked at Marcus, avoiding eye contact because he knew this was wrong but lacked the spine to say so. I looked at Dr. Hassan, clearly wishing she'd never walked into this family drama, and then I smiled. The smile that crossed my face wasn't warm or friendly. It was the kind of smile that should have been a warning, but Bethany was too caught up in her moment of triumph to notice. You know what, Bethany? I said, my voice calm and steady. You're absolutely right about one thing. This is a serious medical center, with serious medical professionals. People who've dedicated their lives to saving others, who've earned their positions through years of training and experience. She nodded, clearly thinking she'd won. Exactly. So maybe now you can see why, which is why I continued reaching into my hoodie pocket and pulling out my phone. I think we should probably call someone who actually works here. Someone who can clarify the hospital's policy on family involvement in medical consultations. Dr. Hassan looked puzzled. I'm not sure what you mean. Well, I said, scrolling through my contacts, I happen to know someone on staff here. We could ask them to explain how these situations are typically handled. Bethany's eyes narrowed. Riley, what are you talking about? I found the number I was looking for and held up my phone. Dr. Patricia Valdez, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. She's probably in the building right now, actually. I could give her a call, see if she's available to weigh in on Dad's case. The color drained from Marcus's face. Riley, you can't call the Chief of Surgery. That's not how hospitals work. Actually, I said, still smiling that dangerous smile. I think you'd be surprised how hospitals work. Doctor. Hassan was staring at me now with a completely different expression. Something like recognition was dawning in her eyes, but she wasn't saying anything yet. This is ridiculous, Bethany snapped. You don't know the Chief of Surgery. Stop making things up to try to save face. I hit the call button and put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Riley, honey, what's wrong? You never call this early unless it's an emergency. Hi, Pat. I'm actually at Riverside General right now. My father had a heart attack last night. Oh my God, sweetie. I'm so sorry. Is he okay? Are you okay? He's stable, thanks to your excellent ER team. Listen, I'm here with my family, and there's been a little misunderstanding about who should be involved in his care discussions. Would you mind clarifying the hospital policy for family consultations? There was a pause on the other end. Wait, you're at Riverside right now? I'm here too. Just finished a bypass surgery. Where are you? Emergency department near the main desk. I'll be right down. I hung up and looked around at the stunned faces surrounding me. Bethany's mouth was literally hanging open. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Hassan was starting to piece things together, and she looked mortified. She'll be here in a few minutes, I said cheerfully. Dr. Valdez is really great. We've known each other for years. She's one of the best cardiac surgeons on the West Coast, actually. Very no-nonsense, but fair. How do you, Marcus started, then stopped, shaking his head in confusion. How do I do that, Marcus? How do you know the chief of surgery? Before I could answer, I heard the distinctive sound of surgical clogs moving quickly across linoleum. Patricia Valdez appeared around the corner, still in her scrubs, her surgical cap pushed back, looking every inch the commanding presence she was. Pat was in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and the kind of presence that made people automatically step aside when she walked down a hallway. She spotted me immediately, and her face broke into a warm smile that transformed her intimidating demeanor completely. "There's my girl," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "How are you holding up? And how's your dad?" "He's doing well, considering. Dr. Hassan here has been taking excellent care of him." I gestured toward the doctor, who was now looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Pat turned to Dr. Hassan with professional interest. "Jennifer, right? I heard about the emergency angioplasty you performed last night. Excellent work, from what I understand." "Thank you, Dr. Valdez, Dr." Hassan managed, still looking confused about what exactly was happening. "So what's this about a misunderstanding regarding family consultations?" Pat asked, her tone becoming more businesslike. I glanced at Bethany, who had gone completely pale. "Well, there seems to be some confusion about who should be included in discussions about Dad's care. Some question about whether I'm equipped to understand medical information." Pat's eyebrows shot up, and she looked around the group with the expression of someone trying to figure out if this was a joke. "I'm sorry, what?" Bethany finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. I just thought. Given the complexity of the situation. The complexity. Pat's voice had taken on a dangerous edge that I recognized from medical conferences when someone presented sloppy research. "Are we talking about the same Riley Thompson who graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine? Thompson, who completed her residency in emergency medicine at Mass General. The same person who's been the chief medical officer at Portland General for the past 2 years." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning system humming overhead. Hassan's face had gone from confusion to horror to what looked like she wanted to crawl under the nearest gurney and disappear forever. Marcus was staring at me like I'd just revealed I was actually an alien. "Chief Medical Officer. Riley. What is she talking about?" Pat looked at me with genuine surprise. "They don't know?" I shrugged. "It never came up. Never came up." Pat's voice was incredulous. "Henny, you've been featured in Medical Today 3 times in the past year alone. That article about your emergency department protocols during the pandemic was groundbreaking. How does that never come up?" Bethany was now leaning against the wall like she needed the support to stay upright. This can't be." "Dr. Hassan," Pat said, turning to the increasingly mortified emergency physician. "I believe Dr. Thompson would be more than qualified to participate in any medical consultations regarding her father's care. Unless, of course, there's some other policy I'm not aware of." "No, absolutely not," Dr. Hassan said quickly. "Of course, Dr. Thompson. I had no idea. I apologize for any confusion." "No need to apologize," I said gently. "You were just trying to navigate what looked like a family disagreement. That's not your fault." Pat was looking at Bethany and Marcus with the kind of clinical interest usually reserved for particularly unusual medical specimens. "I have to ask, what exactly made you think Dr. Thompson wasn't qualified to understand medical information?" Marcus opened and closed his mouth several times without producing any sound. Bethany seemed to have lost the ability to speak entirely. "I think," I said diplomatically. "There might have been some assumptions based on appearances." Pat looked me up and down, taking in my paint-stained hoodie and messy hair. "Oh, that's illuminating." Her tone suggested it was illuminating in ways that weren't particularly flattering to my family members. The security guard who'd been hovering nearby during the earlier confrontation was now trying very hard to look busy with something else. The nurse at the desk had returned to her paperwork, but I could see her stealing glances at our group. "Dr. Valdez." "Doctor," Hassan said tentatively. "Should I reschedule the family consultation to include Dr. Thompson in the medical discussion? I think that would be appropriate, don't you?" Pat's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath it. I held up a hand. "Actually, let me talk to Dad first, if that's okay. I'd like to see how he's feeling about everything before we make any decisions about surgery." "Of course," Dr. Hassan said, clearly relieved to have something concrete to focus on. "He's awake and alert. Room 247 in the cardiac unit. I'll walk you up," Pat said. Then she turned to Marcus and Bethany. "It was interesting to meet you both." As we walked toward the elevators, Pat shook her head. "Riley, honey, I have to ask, why didn't you tell them what you do for a living?" I pushed the elevator call button and considered the question. "You know how it is in families, Pat. Sometimes people see what they expect to see, not what's actually there. But you're the CMO of a major hospital. You've published research papers. You've been quoted in the New England Journal of Medicine. And my brother sees the little sister who dropped out of pre-med 20 years ago and never bothered to ask what happened next." The elevator arrived and we stepped in. Pat was quiet for a moment, then said, "For what it's worth, dropping out of that program was the best thing you ever did. Dr. Stevens was a nightmare, and that whole department was toxic. Transferring to Johns Hopkins and starting over took real courage." "Thanks, Pat. That means a lot. Besides," she added with a grin, "if you hadn't left that program, you never would have met me during your surgery rotation, and I never would have convinced you to consider emergency medicine." "True, and I never would have learned that some of the best medical insights come from working in the trenches, not just reading textbooks." The elevator opened on the cardiac floor, and we walked toward Dad's room. Through the window I could see him sitting up in bed, looking tired but alert. He saw me coming, and his face lit up with relief. "There's my girl," he said as I entered the room. "I was wondering when you'd get here." I kissed his forehead and took his hand. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but the doctors say that's normal." He looked past me to Pat.
And who's this?
"Dad, this is Dr. Patricia Valdez. She's the chief of cardiac surgery here." Dad's eyes widened slightly. "Am I in that much trouble?" Pat laughed.
Not at all.
"Mr. Thompson, I'm actually here because your daughter is one of my dearest friends, and I wanted to make sure you were getting the best possible care." "Does my daughter know the chief of surgery?" I squeezed his hand. "Dad, there are probably a few things about your daughters you don't know." Dad stared at me for a long moment, his weathered hand still gripping mine. "Riley, what does she mean by that?" Before I could answer, Marcus and Bethany appeared in the doorway. They both looked like they'd been through some kind of emotional blender. Bethany's perfect composure was completely shattered, and Marcus kept running his hands through his hair, something he'd done since childhood when he was overwhelmed. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "we need to talk." Pat squeezed my shoulder. "I'll leave you all to catch up. Riley, page me if you need anything, okay? And Mr. Thompson, you're in excellent hands with Dr. Hassan and the cardiac team." After she left, Dad looked around at the three of us. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on? And why does everyone look like they've seen a ghost?" I pulled up a chair next to his bed while Marcus and Bethany remained standing by the door, looking like they weren't sure they were welcome to come closer. "Dad, do you remember when I dropped out of the pre-med program at University of Washington? You drove up to Seattle to help me pack my dorm room." "Of course I remember. You said you needed to figure things out, that medicine wasn't what you thought it would be. Do you remember what you told me that day?" Dad's eyes softened with the memory. "I told you that life isn't about following someone else's path. I said you were smart enough to figure out your own way, and that I'd support whatever decision you made. You did, and you never asked me what I decided to do next. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready," Dad said simply. "You always were independent, even as a little girl. I trusted you to find your way." Marcus shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Riley, I don't understand. If you went back to medical school, if you became a doctor, Why didn't you tell us? I looked at my brother, this successful man who'd somehow never thought to ask his sister what she did for a living beyond freelance work. When did you ever ask, Marcus? The question hung in the air. Dad was watching the exchange with growing understanding. You did tell us, he said suddenly. Christmas 2 years ago. You said you'd gotten a new position. Something about administration. We were all watching the game and Bethany was talking about her new listing and nobody really listened. I finished gently. It's okay, Dad. I know I didn't exactly spell it out. Bethany finally found her voice. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive an old car, you dress like someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, I said. Bethany, I make more money in a year than you and Marcus combined. I just don't feel the need to advertise it. Dad was piecing things together. The phone calls on Sundays when you have to cut our conversations short for work emergencies. The times you've mentioned being tired from long shifts. The medical journals I've seen in your apartment. I run the emergency department at Portland General, Dad. It's a teaching hospital with over 600 beds. When there are emergencies, I get called. Chief Medical Officer, Marcus said quietly, like he was testing the words. That means you're in charge of what exactly? All clinical operations, quality assurance, patient safety protocols, physician staffing, regulatory compliance. I oversee about 400 physicians and nurse practitioners. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of Dad's heart monitor. Bethany was staring at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. The paint stains on your clothes, she said suddenly. I volunteer at a community center on weekends, teaching art classes to kids. It's something I do for fun to decompress from the hospital. And the freelance graphic design work you mentioned. Pro bono work for medical nonprofits. I design educational materials about preventive care for underserved communities. Dad squeezed my hand. Why didn't you correct us when we made assumptions? I considered the question carefully. Because I wanted to see if my family cared enough about me as a person to ask what I actually did with my life. I wanted to know if you valued me for who I am, not what I've achieved. The words hit harder than I'd intended. Marcus actually stepped back like he'd been slapped. Riley, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm so sorry. I just assumed. You assumed I was still the confused 20-year-old who dropped out of school. You never wondered what happened in the 20 years since then. None of you ever asked what I'd made of my life. Bethany was crying now, her mascara creating dark tracks down her cheeks. I feel sick. Oh God. Riley. The things I said downstairs. The way I treated you. The way you always treat me. I corrected gently. This morning wasn't unusual, Bethany. It was just more public. Dad was looking between his children with the expression of a man watching his family fracture in real time. How did we get here? He asked quietly. How did we get to a place where my own son doesn't know what his sister does for a living? Marcus slumped into the other chair. I don't know, Dad. I guess I got so caught up in my own life, my own problems, that I stopped paying attention to anyone else's. It wasn't just you, I said. I could have corrected the assumptions at any time. I chose not to. But why? Bethany asked, wiping her eyes. Why let us think? Because I needed to know if you'd respect me, even if I was exactly who you thought I was. If I was just Riley who worked odd jobs, and lived in a small apartment, and didn't have her life figured out, I needed to know if that version of me would be worthy of basic human dignity. The monitor's beeping seemed louder in the silence that followed. Dad spoke first, and we failed that test, didn't we? Dad, you never— Yes, I did. Maybe not as obviously as the others, but I did. I let them treat you like you were less than. I should have shut that down years ago. Mr. Thompson? Doctor. Hassan appeared in the doorway, looking considerably more nervous than she had during our previous interaction. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to discuss the treatment options for your care. I understand Dr. Thompson will be participating in the consultation. Dr. Thompson is my daughter, Dad said firmly. And yes, she'll be participating in all medical decisions regarding my care. Dr. Hassan nodded quickly. Of course, I've also arranged for Dr. Valdez to review your case personally, given the complexity of the blockages we found. That's not necessary, I said. I trust your judgment completely, Dr. Hassan. You've done excellent work with Dad's case. The relief on Dr. Hassan's face was visible. thank you. That means a great deal is coming from you. After she left to get the consultation materials, Dad looked at me seriously. Riley, I need you to promise me something. What's that? I need you to promise that you'll make the medical decisions based on what's best for me, not on proving a point to your brother and sister-in-law. I smiled at him. Dad, I became a doctor to help people, not to play games with their lives. You'll get the same quality of care and consideration I'd give any patient, even after everything that happened downstairs. Especially after everything that happened downstairs. Marcus and Bethany are going to have to live with their behavior today for a long time. That's punishment enough. Marcus looked up from where he'd been staring at his hands. Riley, how do we fix this? You start by asking questions instead of making assumptions. You start by treating people with basic respect regardless of their job title or bank account. You start by remembering that family means caring about each other as people, not as success stories. And us? Bethany asked quietly. Is there any way to fix what I've done? I studied her tear-stained face, seeing something I'd never seen before, genuine remorse, not just embarrassment at being caught. That depends, I said finally. Are you sorry because you found out you were wrong about my credentials? Or are you sorry because you realize you've been treating another human being like garbage? Bethany was quiet for a long moment. Both, she admitted. But mostly the second one. Riley, I've been awful to you, not just today but for years, and you never deserved any of it. Dad was watching this exchange with interest. You know, he said thoughtfully, maybe having a heart attack isn't the worst thing that could have happened to this family. 3 hours later, we were gathered around a conference table in one of the hospital's family consultation rooms. Dr. Hassan had spread out cardiac imaging scans and test results, while Dr. Valdez sat beside her with Dad's surgical evaluation. The atmosphere was completely different from our morning confrontation, professional, collaborative, focused entirely on Dad's care. The angiography shows significant blockages in 3 major vessels, Dr. Hassan explained, pointing to the imaging. The LAD, that's the left anterior descending artery, has a 90% blockage. We were able to open it with the emergency stent, but given the extent of disease in the other vessels, we're recommending surgical intervention. Dad studied the images with the same careful attention he'd once given construction blueprints. What exactly does that involve? Dr. Valdez leaned forward. We're looking at a triple bypass surgery. We'd take healthy vessels from other parts of your body, typically from your leg or chest wall, and use them to create new pathways around the blocked arteries. It's a significant procedure, but it's also highly effective. What are the risks? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I wanted my family to hear it from the surgical team. In a patient your father's age and condition, we're looking at about a 2% risk of serious complications during surgery. The bigger considerations are recovery time and long-term lifestyle changes. Bethany, who had been quiet throughout the medical discussion, spoke up tentatively. How long would he be in the hospital? Typically 5 to 7 days for the surgery itself, then several weeks of cardiac rehabilitation, Dr. Hassan said. I'll need to take time off work, Dad said practically. Marcus finally contributed to the conversation. Dad, you're retired. Semi-retired, Dad corrected with a slight smile. I still do consulting work for Morrison Construction, but I suppose this might be a good time to make it official. We spent another hour going through the details, surgical timeline, recovery expectations, follow-up care. I found myself translating some of the medical terminology for Marcus and Bethany, not in a condescending way, but simply helping them understand what they were hearing. It was strange how natural it felt to slip into that role. When the doctors left to prepare for Dad's surgery scheduled for the next morning, we were alone again as a family. The silence wasn't uncomfortable this time, more contemplative than tense. Riley, Dad said eventually, I have a question and I want an honest answer. Okay, are you happy? With your life, your work, your choices? The question caught me off guard. Yes, Dad, I really am. Good, that's all I ever wanted for you. He looked at Marcus and Bethany, for all of you. Marcus had been uncharacteristically quiet since the medical consultation. Riley, can I ask you something? Sure. When you were explaining the surgical procedures to us, you did it so naturally. like teaching was something you enjoyed. I do enjoy it. I teach residents and medical students at Portland General. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. You could have made us feel stupid for not understanding the medical terms. Why would I do that? You're not a medical professional. There's no shame in needing explanation. Bethany looked up from where she'd been staring at her hands. But I made you feel stupid for not understanding business and insurance matters. Those are different situations, Bethany. No, they're not. I was being cruel because I thought it made me look more important. She took a shaky breath. Riley, I owe you a real apology, not just for today, but for years of being awful to you. I studied her face, looking for signs that this was just embarrassment talking. But what I saw seemed genuine. Why? I asked simply. Why were you so determined to see me as a failure? Bethany was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was insecure about my own place in this family. Marcus had this successful business, and he was Dad's son, and you were Dad's daughter, and I was just the wife. The outsider. Making you seem less successful made me feel more valuable. The honesty was startling. Dad reached over and patted Bethany's hand. Sweetheart, you were never an outsider to me, your family, but I didn't feel like it, and instead of finding my own way to contribute, I tore down someone else. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. That's not the person I want to be. Then don't be that person, I said gently. It's really that simple. Is it? Can people really change? People change all the time, Bethany. The question is whether they want to put in the work. Marcus cleared his throat. I need to say something too. He turned to face me directly. Riley, I failed you as a brother. I let my wife treat you badly, because it was easier than dealing with the conflict. I made assumptions about your life, because I was too self-absorbed to actually ask questions. Marcus, no, let me finish. You're my little sister. I should have protected you, supported you, celebrated your achievements. Instead, I let you be dismissed and marginalized in your own family. That's inexcusable. You didn't know about my career. I didn't know because I didn't care enough to ask. That's worse. Dad had been listening to these confessions with the expression of someone watching his children finally grow up. You know, he said thoughtfully, your mother always said that crises have a way of showing people who they really are. She said the important thing wasn't avoiding problems, but learning from them. I miss her, I said quietly. Mom had died 5 years ago from cancer, and her absence had somehow made our family dynamics even more strained. She would have been proud of you, Riley. The doctor thing, yes, but more than that. The person you've become, compassionate, accomplished, but without arrogance. She always worried that success would change you. And she would have been disappointed in me, Marcus added. In the way I've treated my family, she would have been disappointed in your behavior. Dad corrected. But she never would have given up on you. Just like I'm not giving up on any of you. A nurse knocked on the door. Mr. Thompson, visiting hours are ending soon, but you're welcome to stay a bit longer, if you need more time. Actually, I said, I think Dad should get some rest before surgery tomorrow. Will you be here in the morning? Dad asked. I'll be here before you wake up. All of us will, Marcus added, then looked at me uncertainly. If that's okay with you. Of course it's okay. He's your father too. As we gathered our things to leave, Bethany hesitated by Dad's bedside. Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry for how I acted today. It was wrong, and it won't happen again. Bethany, honey, you're going to be my daughter-in-law for the rest of my life. We're family. Families forgive each other and move forward. In the hospital parking lot, we stood awkwardly by our cars. The evening air was cool, and the Seattle skyline twinkled in the distance. Riley, Bethany said, would you maybe want to have coffee sometime? I mean, actually get to know each other? I'd like that. Marcus pulled me aside as Bethany got into their car. Are you really okay with this? Trying to fix things? Marcus, I never wanted our family to be broken. I just wanted to be seen and respected for who I am. And now I think we have a chance to build something better than what we had before. He hugged me then. A real hug. Not the perfunctory embraces we'd exchanged at holidays. I'm proud of you, Riley. I should have said that years ago. As I drove back to Portland that night, I thought about the strange turns life takes. 24 hours ago, I was just Dr. Riley Thompson, Chief Medical Officer, living my quiet, successful life. Tonight, I was still Dr. Riley Thompson, but also a daughter and sister who'd finally been seen by her family. My phone buzzed with a text from Pat. "How did everything go with your dad?" I dictated a response. "Surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning. Family dynamics significantly improved. Thanks for having my back today." Her reply came quickly. "Always. That's what family does." She was right, of course. That's exactly what family does. They show up, they support each other, and they work through the hard stuff together. It had just taken a medical emergency and a very public confrontation for my family to remember that. Sometimes the most important healing happens outside the operating room. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office at Portland General, reviewing quarterly patient satisfaction scores, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Dr. Thompson? Your father's here to see you." I looked up, surprised. Dad rarely came to Portland without calling first, and he'd never visited me at the hospital. "Send him in." Dad walked into my office, carrying a small wrapped package, and wearing the biggest grin I'd seen since before his surgery. His recovery had been remarkable, better than anyone had predicted. The triple bypass had been textbook perfect, and he'd thrown himself into cardiac rehabilitation with the same determination he'd once brought to construction projects. "Dad, what are you doing here? Can't a father visit his daughter at work?" He looked around my office, taking in the medical journals, the certificates on the wall, and the photos from various medical conferences. "You know, this is the first time I've actually seen where you work." "Well, this is it. Administrative offices aren't very exciting." "Are you kidding? Riley, this is incredible." He walked over to examine a framed photo of me with the medical team after we'd successfully handled a multi-casualty accident. "Is this from that bus crash you told me about?" "That's the one. 14 patients in 40 minutes. It was controlled chaos, but we didn't lose anyone." Dad studied the photo with obvious pride. "Look at you in charge, saving lives. Your mother would have been so proud." "She would have been proud of all of us, Dad. The way the family came together after your surgery." "Speaking of which," Dad said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I have some news, and this." He handed me the wrapped package. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed newspaper clipping from the Seattle Times business section. The headline read, "Local Tech Entrepreneur Launches Medical Education Initiative." Below was a photo of Marcus shaking hands with someone I didn't recognize. "Marcus started a nonprofit?" I asked, reading through the article. 3 months ago. He's calling it Bridge the Gap. It provides technology and funding to help underserved communities access medical education and telehealth services. He got the idea after watching you talk about your volunteer work." I stared at the article, genuinely surprised. "He never mentioned this. He wanted it to be established before he told you. He was worried you'd think he was just trying to impress you after everything that happened." "And Bethany?" Dad's grin widened. "That's the other news. She's been working with him on it. Turns out she has a real talent for grant writing and community outreach. They've already secured funding for programs in 3 different cities." "Wow." I set the frame down on my desk, still processing. "That's amazing. There's more. They want to ask you to be on their medical advisory board. Help them design the curriculum and establish quality standards." Before I could respond, my pager buzzed. I glanced at it and saw the code for a major trauma incoming. "Dad, I'm sorry. I have to go," he said, standing up. "Do what you do." I was halfway to the door when he called after me. "Riley? Yeah, I love you, kiddo, and I'm proud of you every single day." I smiled and headed for the emergency department, where controlled chaos was about to unfold once again. The trauma was a construction accident. A worker had fallen from scaffolding and suffered multiple injuries. As I coordinated the response team, I found myself thinking about the strange circular nature of life. Here was someone whose job was probably similar to what Dad had done for 40 years, and I was using everything I'd learned to try to save his life. The surgery took 6 hours. When I finally emerged from the OR, exhausted but successful, I found Marcus sitting in the waiting area. "Marcus, what are you doing here? Dad told me about the trauma call. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine. It's part of the job, I know. But I realized I've never actually thought about what that means. What it's like to hold someone's life in your hands." We walked to the hospital cafeteria, which was nearly empty at this late hour. Marcus got coffee while I grabbed a sandwich. I probably wouldn't have time to finish. The construction worker, is he going to be okay? He'll recover fully. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, but nothing we couldn't fix. Marcus nodded, then was quiet for a moment. Riley, I need to tell you something.
Okay.
After Dad's surgery, after everything that happened, I couldn't stop thinking about how wrong I'd been about you. Not just about your career, but about who you are as a person. Marcus, let me finish. I started researching your work, your hospital, the programs you've implemented. Do you know that Portland General has the lowest emergency department mortality rate in the Pacific Northwest? I hadn't expected him to look that up. We have a good team. You have good leadership. I read about the protocols you developed during the pandemic. The way you reorganized patient flow to reduce infection rates while maintaining quality of care. It was brilliant. It was necessary. It was both. He leaned forward. Riley, I spent years thinking I was the successful sibling because I built a profitable company. But what do you do? What you've accomplished, it matters in ways my business never will. Your work matters too, Marcus. Success isn't a competition. I know that now. Which is why I wanted to talk to you about the nonprofit. I took a bite of my sandwich and waited for him to continue. When I started thinking about how to make a real difference, I kept coming back to healthcare access. The communities you work with, the people who can't afford quality medical care or don't have access to medical education. It's a huge problem, but not an unsolvable one. That's where the nonprofit comes in. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a presentation. We're developing an app-based platform that connects rural communities with medical professionals for education and basic telemedicine services. I scrolled through the slides, impressed despite myself. This is actually really well thought out. Bethany did most of the research. She spent months talking to community health workers and studying existing programs to figure out what wasn't working. Bethany did this research. She's been amazing, Riley. You should see her when she talks to these community leaders. She's passionate about this, in a way I've never seen her passionate about anything. I continued looking through the presentation. The scope was ambitious but realistic, the implementation plan was solid, and the potential impact was significant. You want me on the advisory board. We need you on the advisory board. You understand both the clinical side and the administrative challenges. Plus, your experience with underserved populations would be invaluable. I'd have to review everything more carefully before I could commit to anything. Of course. Take all the time you need, Marcus paused. But Riley, I hope you'll consider it. This could be a way for our family to work together on something meaningful. My pager buzzed again, not an emergency this time, just a routine consultation request. I should get back to work. Before you go, Marcus said, there's something else. Bethany and I have been talking about having kids. That caught me off guard. Really, we've been trying for a while actually. But after everything that happened with Dad, after seeing how families can drift apart or come together, we realized we want to build something better. We want our kids to grow up knowing their aunt, really knowing her. Marcus, I'd love that. Good, because we're also hoping you might be willing to be godmother when the time comes. I stared at him. 6 months ago, Bethany had tried to have me removed from a family medical consultation. Now they wanted me to be godmother to their future children. Are you sure about that? Riley, you're one of the most ethical, caring, accomplished people I know. If something happened to Bethany and me, I can't think of anyone I'd rather have looking out for our kids. That means more to me than you know. So you'll think about the advisory board position. I'll think about it. As I walked back toward the emergency department, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible morning in the hospital waiting room. My family had gone from barely knowing who I was to wanting me involved in their most important decisions and future plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Pat. Heard about the construction accident. Nice work today, I replied. Thanks. How did you hear about it? Your father called me. He wanted to make sure you had backup if you needed it. I like that man. I smiled as I entered the ED. Dad calling Pat to check on me was exactly the kind of thing he would do now that he understood what my work actually involved. Dr. Amanda Reyes, one of our senior residents, approached with a chart. Dr. Thompson, the consultation you were paged about, it's ready for your review. What do we have? Elderly patient with chest pain, but something about the presentation doesn't fit the typical cardiac profile. I took the chart and followed her toward the examination room, my mind already shifting into diagnostic mode. This was what I loved most about emergency medicine: the puzzle solving, the critical thinking, the moment when all the pieces came together to reveal the right answer. As we walked, I thought about Marcus's nonprofit proposal. Working with my family on something meaningful, using my medical expertise to help expand healthcare access to underserved communities, it was exactly the kind of project that could make a real difference. Maybe it was time to say yes to something new. 2 years after Dad's heart attack, I stood in the auditorium of the Portland Convention Center, looking out at an audience of nearly 800 healthcare professionals, community leaders, and medical students. The annual Pacific Northwest Medical Innovation Conference had invited me to deliver the keynote address on breaking barriers in healthcare access. What they didn't know was that sitting in the third row were Marcus, Bethany, and Dad, along with someone new. Bethany was holding 6-month-old Emma, their daughter who had indeed made me a godmother, and who had completely transformed our family dynamics in ways none of us had expected. Healthcare access isn't just about building more hospitals or training more doctors, I began, clicking to my first slide. It's about recognizing that the biggest barriers to quality care are often the assumptions we make about who deserves it and who's qualified to receive it. The audience was engaged, taking notes, but my eyes kept drifting to my family. Dad looked proud enough to burst. Marcus was recording the speech on his phone, and Bethany was gently bouncing Emma, who was remarkably well-behaved for a 6-month-old at a medical conference. 3 years ago, my family's nonprofit, Bridge the Gap Initiative, started with a simple question: what happens when communities that need medical care the most are the same communities that medical professionals assume can't understand or benefit from advanced healthcare information? I clicked to the next slide, showing statistics from our pilot programs. The numbers were impressive. 78% improvement in preventive care compliance, 45% reduction in emergency department visits for manageable chronic conditions, and 92% patient satisfaction scores across all participating communities. We discovered that when you treat people with respect, provide information in accessible formats, and acknowledge their intelligence and capacity for understanding their own health needs, remarkable things happen. After the presentation, I was surrounded by colleagues wanting to discuss implementation strategies, research partnerships, and funding opportunities. It took nearly an hour to work my way through the crowd to where my family was waiting. That was incredible, Marcus said, pulling me into a hug. I had no idea you were such a powerful public speaker. Years of presenting to medical boards and hostile hospital administrators, I said. It builds character and confidence, Bethany added, shifting Emma to her other arm. Riley, I was watching the audience during your speech. They were completely captivated. Emma chose that moment to reach out toward me, making the little grabbing motions that babies do when they want attention. I took her from Bethany, and she immediately settled against my shoulder with a contented sigh. She knows her favorite aunt, Dad said, with obvious delight. Her only aunt, I corrected, but I was smiling. Emma had been an unexpected gift to our family. Her arrival had given us all a chance to start fresh, to build new traditions and relationships, without the baggage of our past conflicts. Dr. Thompson, a young woman, approached our group hesitantly. She looked like she was probably a medical student, nervous but determined. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you for your presentation. Of course. What's your name? Sarah Chen. I'm a third-year medical student at OHSU. I've been following your work with rural healthcare access, and it's actually why I chose emergency medicine as my specialty. That's wonderful. What specifically interests you about emergency medicine? The idea that you can make a difference for people regardless of their background or circumstances. That the emergency department is supposed to be the place where everyone gets treated with equal dignity. I glanced at my family, thinking about how far we'd all come. That's exactly right. Emergency medicine at its best is about meeting people where they are and giving them the care they need, no matter what assumptions others might make about them. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Would it be possible to shadow you sometime? I know you're incredibly busy, but I'd love to see how you handle complex cases and manage the administrative side of emergency medicine. Email my assistant next week. We'll set something up. After Sarah left, Marcus looked thoughtful. You know, watching her talk to you reminded me of something. What's that? That morning at the hospital, when Dr. Hassan and Dr. Valdez were trying to figure out how to handle the family dynamics. You could have made them feel terrible for not recognizing who you were immediately. Why would I do that? Exactly. You treated them with the same respect you just showed that student. You didn't use your position to humiliate people who made honest mistakes. Bethany nodded. It's something I've learned from watching you with Emma, actually. The way you interact with her, you never talk down to her, even though she's a baby. You treat her like her thoughts and feelings matter. Because they do matter. All people deserve basic respect, regardless of age, education, or social status. Which brings me to something we wanted to discuss with you, Marcus said. The nonprofit has been invited to expand nationally. The Department of Health and Human Services wants to fund a pilot program in 15 states. I raised my eyebrows. That's huge. Congratulations. We can't do it without you, Bethany said. The federal oversight requires a chief medical officer to supervise the clinical aspects of the program. I already have a job as a chief medical officer. We know. We've talked to the board at Portland General. They're willing to let you split your time, 3 days a week here, 2 days a week with the nonprofit. It would mean some travel, but most of the administrative work could be done remotely. I looked down at Emma, who was starting to fall asleep in my arms. That's a big decision. Take your time thinking about it, Marcus said. But Riley, this could reach millions of people. Everything we've learned from the regional programs, scaled up nationally. And Dad added quietly, it would mean working closely with family on something that really matters. The weight of that statement settled over us. 3 years ago, my family had assumed I wasn't qualified to participate in basic medical decisions. Now they were asking me to lead a national healthcare initiative. There's one more thing, Bethany said, looking slightly nervous. Emma's not the only new addition to the family we wanted to tell you about. I looked at her more closely and noticed what I'd missed before, the subtle glow, the way she was holding herself, the fact that she hadn't had any wine at dinner the night before. You're pregnant again. 12 weeks, she confirmed, beaming. We wanted to wait until we were past the first trimester to tell everyone. That's wonderful news. I hugged her carefully, mindful of the baby in my arms. We were hoping, Marcus said, that you'd consider being godmother again. And Bethany added, maybe think about moving back to Seattle. The national nonprofit headquarters would be here, and it would be nice to have the kids grow up knowing their aunt. I looked around at my family, Dad with his eyes bright with hope, Marcus and Bethany waiting anxiously for my response, baby Emma sleeping peacefully in my arms. It was a picture I couldn't have imagined 3 years ago. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything, Marcus replied. If I hadn't turned out to be a doctor, if I really had been just Riley who worked odd jobs and lived in a small apartment, would you still be asking me to be godmother to your children? Would you still want me to move closer to my family? The question hung in the air for a moment. Then Bethany spoke, her voice steady and sure. Yes. Because the person you are, your kindness, your integrity, your ability to see the best in people even when they don't deserve it, that's not because you're a doctor, that's just who you are. It took us way too long to see it, but now we do. Dad nodded. You could be anything, Riley, and you'd still be the daughter I'm proud of every single day. Emma stirred in my arms, opened her eyes briefly, and gave me what might have been a smile before settling back to sleep. Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. The national program, moving back to Seattle, all of it. Really? Marcus's face lit up. Really? But I have one condition. Name it. No more family meetings in hospital waiting rooms. If we're going to work together, we will communicate like adults from now on. Everyone laughed, and Dad pulled us all into a group hug that somehow managed to include baby Emma without waking her up. Standing there in the convention center, surrounded by the noise of medical professionals discussing innovations and breakthroughs, I realized that sometimes the most important healing happens not in operating rooms or emergency departments, but in the quiet moments when families choose to see each other clearly and love each other anyway. 5 years later, I was standing in the main conference room of the Bridge the Gap Initiative's national headquarters in Seattle, watching my nephew Jake, now 2.5, attempt to help his grandfather review funding proposals by enthusiastically coloring everything within reach. Emma, now 5, was more diplomatically seated at the kids' table Dad had set up in the corner, working on a puzzle with the focused determination she'd inherited from both her parents. "Aunt Riley, look," Emma called out, holding up a completed section of her puzzle. "It's a hospital." "Very nice, sweetheart. Are you going to be a doctor when you grow up?" "Maybe. Or a teacher. Or a firefighter. Dad says I can be anything I want." "Your dad is absolutely right." The room was bustling with activity as our team prepared for the quarterly review with federal oversight committees. In the 5 years since the national program launched, we'd expanded to serve over 200 communities across 30 states. The impact data was staggering. Millions of people now had access to quality healthcare education and basic medical services who previously had none. But what made me proudest wasn't the statistics. It was watching Marcus present implementation strategies with the same passion I'd once seen him bring to his tech startup, or seeing Bethany negotiate with state health departments with a skill that impressed even the most seasoned bureaucrats. They'd found their calling in this work, and it showed. Dr. Thompson, David Martinez, our program coordinator, approached with a tablet full of data. "We just got the final evaluation results from the Department of Health and Human Services." I took the tablet and scrolled through the executive summary. The numbers were better than we'd hoped: patient satisfaction scores in the 90th percentile, significant improvements in preventive care metrics, and cost savings that had caught the attention of healthcare economists nationwide. "This is incredible work, David. Have Marcus and Bethany seen these yet? I wanted to show you first, since you're presenting to the Oversight Committee this afternoon." Marcus appeared at my elbow, holding Jake, who was now sporting blue marker streaks across his face. "What are we looking at?" "The federal evaluation results. We exceeded every benchmark they set for us." "Seriously?" Bethany joined us, wiping markers off Jake's hands with the efficiency of an experienced mother. "What were the final numbers?" I showed them the key metrics, watching their faces light up as they processed what this meant. Not just for the program, but for the thousands of families whose lives had been improved by their work. "There's more," David added. 3 additional states have formally requested to join the program, and the World Health Organization wants to study our model for potential international implementation. Marcus looked stunned. "As in, other countries?" "As in, the WHO thinks what we've built here could work in developing nations with similar healthcare access challenges." Emma wandered over, drawn by the excitement in our voices. "What's everyone happy about?" "We're happy because the work we do is helping lots and lots of people," Bethany explained, lifting her daughter onto her lap. "Like when Aunt Riley helped Grandpa when his heart was sick." "Exactly like that, baby." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, thinking about that morning 5 years ago. Dad's health had remained excellent since his surgery, but the memory of how close we'd come to losing him, and how badly our family had fractured before coming back together, still had the power to shake me. Speaking of Grandpa, Dad himself appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here to see Dr. Riley Thompson." Behind him stood Dr. Patricia Valdez, looking exactly the same as she had 5 years ago, though she was now wearing civilian clothes instead of scrubs. "What are you doing here?" "I was in Seattle for a cardiothoracic conference, and thought I'd stop by to see this famous nonprofit I keep reading about in medical journals." She looked around the bustling office with obvious approval. "Impressive operation you've got here. Would you like a tour?" "Actually, I was hoping I could steal you for lunch. There's something I wanted to discuss with you." We walked to a quiet restaurant a few blocks from the office, catching up on hospital gossip and medical conference drama, but I could tell Pat had something specific on her mind. "So," she said once we'd ordered, "I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." The American College of Emergency Physicians is creating a new position, Director of Community Healthcare Innovation. It's essentially a national role focused on developing and implementing programs that improve emergency care access in underserved areas. I set down my water glass, intrigued. What would that involve? Policy development, research coordination, working with federal agencies on healthcare initiatives. Basically, everything you're already doing with Bridge the Gap, but with the backing of the largest emergency medicine organization in the country. That sounds amazing, but I'm not sure I could leave the nonprofit. My family. Who says you'd have to leave? The ACEP position is designed to work with existing successful programs. Bridge the Gap could become the model implementation partner for ACEP initiatives nationwide. The implications hit me immediately. That would give us access to resources and reach we could never achieve independently. Exactly. Plus, the position comes with a research budget that would allow you to study and refine your approaches. You could help shape healthcare policy at the national level. I thought about the conversation I'd had with my family just that morning about next steps for the organization. We'd grown as large as we could manage with current resources, and were starting to turn away communities that wanted to join the program. Would this mean moving to Washington? Some travel, but the position is designed to be flexible. You could work from Seattle and come to DC as needed. Can I think about it? Of course. But Riley, this is exactly the kind of opportunity your work has been building toward. You've proven that community-centered healthcare can work at scale. Now you'd have the chance to make it standard practice across the country. When I returned to the office, I found the family in Marcus's conference room, with Emma and Jake now napping on the small couch Dad had installed for exactly this purpose. How was lunch with Dr. Valdez? Bethany asked quietly. I told them about the ACEP opportunity, watching their faces as they processed what it would mean. You have to take it, Marcus said immediately. Riley, this is huge. But what about the nonprofit? I can't just abandon what we've built here. You wouldn't be abandoning anything, Bethany said. You'd be expanding it, taking everything we've learned and making it available to the entire country. Dad, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Honey, do you remember what you told me in the hospital that day about why you became a doctor? To help people. And what would help more people? Continuing to work with the communities we already serve, or changing the entire system so that every community has access to what we've created? The question hung in the air. Emma stirred on the couch, opened her eyes, and sleepily called out, Aunt Riley. Yes, sweetheart. Are you going to help more people feel better? Sometimes the most profound questions come from the most unexpected sources. I think so, Emma. I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office in Washington, D.C., reviewing policy proposals that would establish community healthcare access standards for emergency departments nationwide. On my desk was a photo from Jake's 3rd birthday party, the whole family together, laughing at something Dad had said, with the Bridge the Gap headquarters visible in the background. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Emergency department wait times in rural Oregon down 40%, thanks to our new telemedicine protocols. Mom would have been so proud of what this family has accomplished. He was right. Mom would have been proud, not just of our professional achievements, but of the way we'd learned to see and value each other, the way we'd turned a moment of crisis into a foundation for building something meaningful together. I thought back to that morning in the Riverside General Emergency Department, when I'd stood there in my paint-stained hoodie, being dismissed and marginalized by people who thought they knew who I was based on how I looked. If someone had told me then that 5 years later I'd be working to reshape healthcare policy while collaborating with those same family members who doubted me, I never would have believed it. But life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are also the ones capable of the greatest growth and change. Sometimes the crises that threaten to tear families apart are exactly what's needed to rebuild them stronger than before. And sometimes, the most important healing happens not when you prove people wrong about who you are, but when you help them become better versions of themselves. My assistant knocked on the door. Dr. Thompson, the Secretary of Health and Human Services is here for your meeting about the Rural Healthcare Initiative. I straightened my jacket, a far cry from the paint-stained hoodie of 5 years ago, but the person wearing it was fundamentally the same. Someone who believed that every person deserved dignity, respect, and access to quality healthcare, regardless of assumptions others might make about them. Send her in, I said. Let's change the world. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.